The wind here doesn't howl, it screams. A constant, high-pitched keening that seeps through the seams of the hut and into your bones, even when the heaters are working overtime. I've been posted to deserts, jungles, and urban hellholes, but nothing on Earth feels as hostile as the Antarctic interior in a whiteout. You can't see 10 feet ahead, and the cold cuts through gear rated for 80 like it's a joke. My name isn't important for this record. All that matters is that I was sent here as a military liaison to a joint U.S. Norwegian research station on the edge of Queen Maud Land, a place so far off any map, worth carrying that the coordinates are written in pencil. Officially, we're here to investigate anomalous seismic activity under one of the deeper glacier systems. Unofficially, well, I don't have the full picture yet. The part I do have doesn't sit right. The mission brief was short, precise, and sterile. Primary objective, assess and secure anomaly site. Secondary objective, support scientific team with logistics and security. Operational hazard level, extreme. No mention of what the anomaly was, only that the zone was restricted geophysical instability. That label's a catch-all for anything from unstable ice shelves to radiation leaks. I've learned it's also the perfect euphemism for things they don't want on public record. Our team was assembled in Tromsø, Norway, before the long flight south. Dr. Alara Voss, mission lead and glaciologist, speaks like she's always holding something back. Eyes too sharp for someone who's supposedly just here for the data. Lieutenant Mark Petrov, Russian defector, demolitions expert, gray stubble, permanent smirk, the kind of man who keeps you guessing whether he's armed at breakfast. Sergeant Kane, heavy weapons specialist, built like a snow tractor and twice as loud, who thinks all this talk of anomalies is academic nonsense. Ray's medic, soft-spoken, devout, always wearing a rosary under his thermal layers. Sometimes I catch him murmuring prayers under his breath when he thinks no one's listening. 2 civilian researchers from Oslo, brilliant but green, already miserable in the cold. It took us 3 days to reach the station. The last 100 miles were overland in a pair of tracked snowcats, crawling across an endless, blinding plain. Out here, direction stops meaning anything. North, south, east, west are just words. From the start, the place felt wrong. The comms have been patchy since we crossed into the restricted zone, static-laced transmissions cutting in and out. The station's perimeter sensors occasionally pick up what the techs call auroral interference, bursts of garbled noise, too regular to be random. The wind sometimes carries a cadence that's not quite natural. It doesn't sound like wind over ice. It sounds like chanting. 2 nights ago, Voss pulled me into the comms room. She had a series of satellite scans spread across the table, each image layered over the last, forming a picture as the weeks progressed. At first glance, it looked like any deep ice formation, pale, fractured streaks under a mile of frozen crust. But the latest pass showed something solid, long and perfectly symmetrical. 300 meters from bow to stern if it had a bow and stern. No ice fissures running through it, no signs of deformation. Whatever it wasn't made by wind, water, or plate shifts. It was placed there. I asked her what it was. She didn't answer, just pointed to the coordinates printed at the bottom of the image. That's when Ray's, sitting at a nearby console, looked up from his worn leather Bible and muttered, "That's where it is, the Watcher's tomb." I'd never heard the phrase before, but the way he said it, it wasn't an expression. It was a location, a story. Something old. The wind slammed against the hut just then, shaking the walls. I don't believe in omens, but I remember thinking it sounded a lot like a warning. We rolled at 0400, the world still half dreaming under a sky the color of bruised jade. The aurora dragged a pale green veil across the horizon, low and torn, and the wind had sharpened overnight. I rode lead snowcat with Voss and Kane, the cabin rattling like a metal lung around us. The treads chewed a path through sastrugi and powder, and every few minutes the ice answered back, long, whale-deep groans resonating up through the chassis and into my molars. That sound makes you think about what is under you, about how fragile the weight of a man is when a continent decides to move. Petrov's cat followed 20 meters behind. Ray's and the two civvies split between the vehicles. The convoy radio popped with static and half-words, the kind of interference that sounds like a voice breathing in from another room. Kane kept fiddling with the gain. "Say again, base," he tried for the fourth time, a hiss. Then a phrase that wasn't English and wasn't Norwegian, consonants scraping like ice on glass. Voss elbowed the volume down without looking away from her tablet. "Terrain drops in a kilometer," she said. "Crevices register shallow but frequent. Stay on the plotted line." I watched the GPS cursor stutter on her screen, hesitate, then correct itself like a drunk regaining balance. The compass clipped inside the dash started to spin, a lazy carousel. I tapped it once. It spun faster. Rays came on the net from the rear cat. "Medical all good. Our civvies are nauseated. Could be the altitude." "It's not the altitude," Petrov said, his voice a dry crackle. "It is the song." "What song?" Kane snorted. "You do not hear it, Sergeant, under the wind." I did not answer. The wind was doing what wind always does out here, yet it carried something regular in it, a timed cadence, as if the air had learned to breathe by numbers. I set my eyes on the windshield, on the endless white, on the faint shadow of the aurora swaying like kelp under frozen water. We reached the first marker 20 minutes later, a yellowed triangular flag half entombed in ice and a row of low, dark shapes beyond it. The old Soviet camp rose from the drift like a graveyard of ribs. Quonset huts with their backs broken by seasons of pressure. A rusted antenna bent into a question mark. Kane slowed us as Voss lifted a hand. "Quick stop," she said. "We confirm no hazards, log the site, move on." We stepped into air that hurt to inhale. I moved first, rifle slung, the others fanning out behind. Our boots squealed on hoarfrost. Through a broken porthole I saw the interior of the nearest hut, bunks lined in 2 tiers, blankets stiff as bark. Rays joined me at the threshold, his breath a small storm. Inside, the corpses lay where sleep would have taken them. Frost-rimed lashes and beards, hair caught mid-stir, eyes open and filmed to milky white. No blood, no wounds, no sign of struggle. A kettle had boiled dry on a small stove long ago, now a welded monument to one bad minute. On the far wall, a calendar still hung at January, every day X'd out by the same steady hand until it stopped. Rays took one slow step forward and traced a thumb over his rosary. "Eternal rest," he whispered. "Radiation?" Voss asked from the doorway. "No meter spike," I said, checking. "No obvious contamination." Kane leaned in, jaw tight. "Sleep and never woke up." "Gas leak, maybe." "Seals are intact," Petrov said from the next hut. "No trace of CO. They laid down, they listened. Then they stopped." We were silent long enough to hear the wind find a new voice under the brim of the broken roof. The chanting cadence thickened, as if the ruins themselves were humming. I had the sudden, childish urge to tell everyone to walk softer. "Log it," Voss said, and her voice was careful. "We move." The ice beyond the camp pitched downward by degrees, the terrain rippling like a frozen sea that had tried to harden mid-storm. The snowcats bucked and swayed. The GPS began to misbehave outright, distances stretching and snapping back, as if the satellite couldn't decide how far we were from what we were approaching. On Voss's screen, a wireframe model ghosted over the map, a long spindle shape buried at a depth that should have guaranteed absolute deformation. The readouts on the dash flickered. For a moment my altimeter believed we were 300 meters above sea level, then 2,000, then blinked an error code that read in capital letters, "Thus saith the Lord." I looked away and it was back to standard numerals. Kane saw it too, he didn't crack a joke. "Base, this is convoy," I tried again. "We are experiencing instrument anomalies on approach." "Vow and not," the radio offered, clipped and strangely tender, as if quoting someone I had forgotten. Rays coughed over the net, then went silent. When he spoke again, his voice was doubled, his own voice underneath a high, thin tone that made my fillings ache. Alice to buy Rabicum," he said, and then in a language I had only heard in footnotes and fever dreams. The syllables moved like latticework. "Do not unseal the ark." "Rays." I kept my voice flat. Status. His reply came like a gasp. I'm fine, I'm just a dizzy spell. It's past. Keep him on O's, Kane said. Already doing it, Petrov muttered. Our priest is breathing. We crested the last rise, and the world fell away into a glazed basin scoured by a katabatic wind. The aurora hunched directly above it, a ring of dim green like a crown set too low on a skull. Voss pointed to the far side where a line of bamboo probes marked the last survey grid. Petrov led us down a switchback high enough to make the snowcats complain. At the basin's center, set apart from everything by emptiness, the ice had a different quality, darker, smoother, as if it remembered being water. This is it, Voss said, more to herself than to us. The apex. We drilled. The auger squealed as it bit, powder cascading up in a steady spiral, the motors thrumming through our boots. Temperature sensors dropped on cables into a shaft so cold it should have been a single pure note of silence. Instead, the sensor feed returned with a faint harmonic you could hear if you listened against the casing, the chant, structured and recursive, an equation sung under its breath. At 90 meters, the bit ground against something not ice. A tone rose through the rig, bell clear, and Petrov pulled the kill switch on reflex. We lowered a camera on the fiber. The feed came back grainy, then sharpened. A black curve filled the screen. Not stone, not any polymer I knew. The surface was smooth and lustrous, yet looked old by the way frost clung to the imperfections like stars to a night sky. Voss whispered, "Dear God!" We widened the shaft by increments, then cut a second to triangulate. The image resolved into geometry, the suggestion of a hull, but one that had learned shipwright from cathedral and obsidian. Relief work chased the metal in shallow lines, sigils nested within sigils, a script that teased the eye. Even on the small monitor, I could see how wrong it was, how it mixed alphabets that should not meet. Cuneiform angles braided into Proto-Hebrew strokes, both threaded by curves that belonged to no human tradition. Kane spat into the wind and wiped his mouth with the back of a glove. "This is a prank," he said, and he sounded like he wanted someone to argue. "A stunt, a movie set." "Then the budget was divine," Petrov said softly. "We rigged a heated probe, a fat iron spear run hot enough to glare. It touched the black surface and died like a match in rain. The camera showed no mark. We tried again with a tungsten cutter. The light flared, failed, and left us with our breaths fogging in equal parts effort and doubt. "Different approach," Voss said, and her voice had gone clinical, that tone she used when terror needed a leash. "Look for access." We ran the camera along the curvature, bumping, pivoting, mapping. 70 meters to the east, we found an interruption in the seamless dark, a circular plate set flush, rimmed by 7 small bas-reliefs like seals on an imperial letter. Each seal bore a different sign, all of them wrong in different ways. My eyes watered looking at them. "Panel," I said, "or a hatch?" "Temperature?" Voss asked. I checked the readout twice. The sensor told me the steel of the camera housing was 20 below. The hatch face registered warmer. Not warm in the sense of life, but warm the way a stone is warmer than the air in a tomb. Reyes put his gloved palm against the ice where the hatch lay, separated by a hand's width of clarity. He closed his eyes. For a heartbeat the wind quieted, or perhaps I just stopped hearing it. "Do not unseal the ark," he breathed, and when he opened his eyes he looked unaccountably young and infinitely old. "Please!" The wind found its voice again, and the ice below us sang back. We set the charges anyway. Petrov worked in silence, the cold fog of his breath thickening around the welding mask. The thermite charges were small, precision cuts meant to open without destabilizing the surrounding ice, but each one carried more destructive heat than a tank shell. He set them in a tight semicircle around the hatch's seals, hands steady despite the temperature. The 7 bas-reliefs watched him, their etched faces caught somewhere between human and bird, lion and something else I didn't have a name for. "Last chance to walk away," Petrov said over his shoulder. No one moved. He lit the first charge. White light flooded the shaft like sunrise through a keyhole, the molten roar drowning out the wind. Sparks cascaded down into the void, sizzling against the black surface. The second charge followed, then the third, until the ring glowed like the rim of an eclipsed sun. The final detonation punched a thud through the ice, a deep, soft concussion that felt less like an explosion and more like a lung filling with air after centuries underwater. Something inside had just exhaled. We lowered the camera first. The lens fogged instantly, then cleared. For a moment, nothing but blackness, then the faint shimmer of frost retreating from the edges of the opening. Petrov was the first to drop in, boots hitting a surface that wasn't ice. "Warm," he called up, surprise softening his usual granite tone. "Like engine room, not sauna." I followed him down the rope. The air met me halfway dense, carrying the metallic tang of old blood and the faint sweetness of myrrh, the way a church smells just before a funeral mass. My goggles misted over and cleared again, revealing the impossible. The chamber was vast, the ceiling so high the lights vanished into it. The architecture walked a line between shipyard and cathedral, curved ribs of black metal arched upward like the skeleton of a leviathan. Every beam etched with the same alien scripture. Between those ribs, panels of stained crystal depicted scenes I could not fully take in before they began to shift in my mind's eye. Winged beings kneeling in chains, cities on fire beneath a sky that seemed to bleed. Our boots rang faintly on the floor metal, not ice, and that sound felt wrong here, like laughter in a mausoleum. At the far end of the hold, set on a raised dais, stood the sarcophagus. It was carved from a single slab of black stone that drank the light. 7 iron bands cinched it closed, each one engraved with symbols that glowed like banked embers. The glow wasn't steady, it pulsed, like a slow heartbeat. The surface shimmered slightly in the warmth, though I knew it wasn't heat I was seeing. The civvies stood transfixed. One of them, Larson, the younger of the two, took an unconscious step forward, head tilted as though listening to something none of us could hear. His breath steamed in a slow rhythm, his lips moving. "Larson," I called, but my voice fell short in the thick air. "It's beautiful," he said, almost reverently. He climbed the dais as if in a trance, removing one glove. Before anyone could stop him, he reached out and laid his bare hand on the stone. The frostbite hit instantly, skin whitening, cracking in jagged lines up his arm toward the elbow. He gasped, but it was not in pain. The sound was almost blissful. His eyes rolled upward until only the whites showed, his mouth curling into a smile too serene for a dying man. "The trumpet will sound for me," he whispered, voice calm even as his knees buckled. Convulsions racked him, violent, total, throwing his limbs in every direction. The white spread over his neck and face, his skin crystallizing from the inside out. In less than 10 seconds, he was still. We didn't touch him. None of us moved for a long moment. Petrov finally bent, gloved hands checking for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. His expression was unreadable when he stood again. "Not frostbite," he said. "Something else." My head was buzzing. At first I thought it was adrenaline, but then I realized it was sound not in my ears but behind my eyes. It started as a low drone, then rose, shaping itself into images. I saw a sky on fire, mountains convulsing under the shock of a single horn blast that split the clouds in two. Armies of winged shapes filled the air, their bodies ablaze, their faces concealed by helms of living gold. Below them, oceans turned to glass, reflecting the carnage in perfect, awful clarity. A figure stood at the center of it all, bound in chains of light, yet its gaze held the strength to level cities. My stomach clenched, and I felt the ice beneath us groan, loud enough for everyone to hear this time. It wasn't the shifting, creaking sound of pressure. It was something heavy moving far below in time with the images behind my eyes. Kane swore under his breath. "Tell me you all felt that." We all had. Voss broke from her paralysis first, snapping orders. "We log everything. No one touches anything else. Petrov, seal your charges. Kane, perimeter." Her voice was crisp, but I saw the twitch in her jaw. Ray's hadn't moved since Larson fell. His lips were moving in silent prayer, eyes locked on the sarcophagus as though it might lunge for him. When I put a hand on his shoulder, he flinched hard. "It's awake," he murmured. I looked back at the glowing bands, 7 still unbroken, but the pulse was faster now. We stayed. We should have left the moment Larson's body hit the floor, but the chain of command was fogged by something heavier than curiosity, compulsion, maybe. Petrov was the first to start showing signs. The night after Larson's death, I woke to the sound of his pencil scratching. He was hunched over his notebook in the glow of his headlamp, eyes half closed, hand moving in steady loops and angles that flowed like water. "What are you drawing?" I asked. He didn't answer at first, just kept working until a page was full, then another. I crouched closer and felt my throat go dry. The symbols were perfect matches for the ones on the sarcophagus, right down to the way each line seemed to hum if you looked at it too long. Petrov blinked awake mid-stroke, staring at the page like it had materialized on its own. "It's for the ceiling," he said. "It has to be exact." The air inside the ship was colder when we woke the next morning, -15, and dropping. Frost filmed the stained crystal panels, distorting the chained figures into shapes that looked more like they were struggling than kneeling. I caught my own breath hanging thick and white in front of me, despite the heaters we'd rigged. Kane was jumpy, scanning the vaulted ribs above like he expected enemy fire. I found him in one of the narrow side corridors, talking under his breath. "You good?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "Orders just came down," he said, voice low and tense. "Stand down, let it rise." "From who?" "My co." I knew his old commanding officer had been dead for 6 years. I didn't say it. By midday, Reyes called a halt to our work, his hands trembling as he gripped his Bible. He had the look of a man cornered in his own mind. "In the book of Enoch," he began, "there were the Watchers, angels who came down, took wives among men, and taught forbidden knowledge. They were punished, bound in darkness until the day of judgment." He walked us to the dais, pointing to the glowing bands cinched around the sarcophagus. These are the 7 seals. Each one holds it in place. The text says if the seals are broken, the bound will rise and the final trumpet will sound." "That's just scripture," Kane said, his voice cracking a little on just. Reyes shook his head. "No, look at them. They match exactly line for line with the seals in the manuscripts. Even the order is right. And this thing is one of them, one of the Watchers." Voss was pale but steady. "If that's true, then this isn't a ship, it's a prison, and we're standing inside the cell." Petrov chuckled, soft at first, then louder, until it became something like a laugh you'd hear from someone watching a house burn down. "That means," he said, "we are the first witnesses in thousands of years." The word witnesses sat in my gut like a lead weight. By the second night, the temperature inside had dropped another 10 degrees. The heaters ran constantly, but the cold felt intelligent, finding its way under layers, into bones, a creeping insinuation rather than a blast. Our breath condensed on the sarcophagus in feathery fractals, and every so often one of the glowing bands would flicker like a candle guttering in a draft. I caught Petrov in the tunnel we'd cut for exfil, chipping deliberately at the support struts. The beam of my flashlight caught the grin he hadn't meant to show. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. "Sealing us in," he said, voice warm with certainty. "We're chosen to witness the dawn." I stepped closer, hand drifting toward the sidearm at my hip. "Chosen by who?" He tilted his head as though listening to someone just over my shoulder. "By the one they buried." Before I could stop him, he slammed the point of his ice axe into the last strut. The tunnel roof caved inward in a cascade of snow and shattered ice, cutting off our only clear way out. Kane arrived at a run, saw the collapse, and swore so loudly it echoed through the vaulted hold. Petrov walked past him without meeting his eyes, trailing Frost like a shadow. We gathered back at the sarcophagus to regroup. That's when I saw it. The bands were no longer 7. There were 6. The missing one lay on the floor at the base of the dais, rusted through in a way that didn't make sense. Metal that had held for millennia shouldn't just give way overnight. I bent to touch it, but Reyes grabbed my wrist. His eyes were wide, his voice hoarse. "Don't! It's not just metal, that's a lock and it's broken." Voss knelt beside it, running her scanner over the length. No heat signature, no corrosion patterns consistent with oxidation. She looked up at me. "It didn't rust, it aged, all at once." The remaining 6 bands seemed brighter now, their glow steady but thinner, like candlelight under strain. The pulsing heartbeat was faster again, and I realized the ice under my boots was no longer groaning, it was breathing. I didn't tell the others about the whisper I heard when I looked down at the broken band. Just a single word, so quiet it could have been imagined. Soon. It began as a hum. At first I thought it was the heaters cycling, but the pitch climbed until it resonated in my sternum, vibrating the air into a living thing. The stained crystal panels above us shivered in sympathy, light bleeding through them from no source I could see. The hum grew into a note, pure, unbroken, and the aurora outside the ship twisted in on itself, writhing into a deep crimson crown above the glacier. Through the black ribs of the hull, I saw it flicker against the ice walls like blood in water. The floor trembled. A fissure split across the dais, and the sarcophagus pulsed once, then cracked. A thread of white light seeped out, impossibly bright against the dark. The sound that followed was a deep snap, like a bone breaking in the earth itself. One of the 6 remaining iron bands dropped away, hissing where it struck the frozen metal floor. Voss stumbled back, her breath a ragged cloud. "It's reacting to us!" Her words drowned in the roar that came next. The ice overhead fractured with a report like artillery fire, and a cascade of snow and powdered frost sifted down around us. The sarcophagus split open. Light poured out, blinding and absolute, so intense I could feel it through my eyelids. When I forced my eyes open again, something was rising from within, a figure too large for the dais, yet somehow contained by it. 6 wings unfolded, each one made of molten glass that refracted the crimson aurora into shards across the chamber. Its form was humanoid but stretched, elongated, bound still in places by iron links that smoked where they touched its flesh. The voice that followed was not a voice at all. It was a choir and a scream, 1,000 throats speaking in perfect unison. "The 7th seal is broken." I staggered back, my legs moving without my permission. Kane had dropped to one knee, his face drained of blood, muttering his dead commander's name over and over. Petrov was laughing again, louder now, tears freezing on his cheeks. Reyes stepped forward, rosary clutched so tightly his knuckles shone white through the gloves. "This isn't the judgment yet," he said, voice shaking. "Not if I can help it." I saw the C4 strapped to his chest rig. "No," I said, crossing to him. "We need another way." "There isn't one," Reyes interrupted. "You don't bind a thing like this with steel. You starve it of power. The core, the heart of this ship, whatever it runs on, I blow it, maybe it stays asleep." "Maybe." Behind us, the entity turned its head. Its eyes, or what should have been eyes, were molten apertures, burning without heat. Chains shifted on its torso with a sound like metal dragged over glass. It took a step forward, and the deck beneath it groaned in pain. Reyes gripped my arm. "Get Kane out! Find the surface." I hesitated, the cold in my chest no longer from the air. "Reyes!" "God have mercy," he said, and was gone into the corridor toward the core. The hum pitched upward, a keening that made the walls ripple like water. Kane was barely conscious, shock and cold had stripped the strength from his legs. I hooked his arm over my shoulder and half dragged, half carried him toward the excavation tunnel, feeling the ice shift under our boots. Halfway there, the light behind us dimmed and then surged. I turned. The entity stood fully now, wings outstretched, chains snapping one by one. Its gaze found me through the gloom, pinning me in place. The world narrowed to the space between us. "You will sound the last trumpet." The words were inside my skull, carved there, vibrating in the roots of my teeth. I wanted to answer, but my throat locked against my will. Then the blast came. A thunderclap swallowed the hum, and a white shockwave ripped through the corridor, flinging Kane and me against the ice. I smelled burning metal and something sweeter, myrrh, thick and cloying. The floor bucked under us, splitting into jagged faults. I pulled Kane up and staggered onward, lungs screaming. Behind us, the roar of collapsing ice mingled with something else, a sound that might have been the entity's scream or its laugh or both. The tunnel was half-caved, but we forced through, crawling under slabs of ice, the cold biting through my gloves until my hands felt carved from stone. We emerged into the open. The surface was chaos, plumes of frost erupting skyward as the glacier heaved and cracked. The crimson aurora pulsed overhead like a heartbeat. We stumbled toward the ridge where the snowcat had been parked. No sign of Petrov, no sign of Voss, no sign of rays. The ground shuddered once more, then stilled. The aurora dimmed back to green, its pulse fading. The only sound left was the wind. Kane collapsed into the snow, gasping. I dropped beside him, both of us staring back at the settling ice. Nothing moved. But deep under the crust, I swore I could still hear the faintest echo, a hum, steady and patient, waiting. They pulled us from the ice 12 days later. A Norwegian search team found us half buried near the ridge, Kane barely breathing, my own hands blackened with frostbite under the gloves. I remember the sound of the rotors, the smell of aviation fuel, and then nothing for a long time. When I woke, it was in a sealed ward at a NATO facility somewhere in southern Europe, the kind of place where windows don't open and the clocks don't have hands. A pair of officers in pressed uniforms sat across from me, their notebooks untouched. They told me the mission had been a geological survey gone wrong. A misjudged weather front, structural collapse in the glacier, tragic losses. They said there was no record of a buried vessel, no Dr. Alara Voss, no LT Mark Petrov, no rays. I didn't argue, I just asked about Kane. The answer came 2 days later: hypothermia complications, organ failure. They said it was peaceful. I didn't believe them. They let me go eventually, though it felt less like freedom and more like being released into a larger cell. I keep my head down, I stay away from reporters. I don't use the word watcher, but sleep isn't safe. The dreams come every night now, growing sharper each time. At first it was only the hum, faint and low, threaded under the wind in my head. Then it became a horn note, single, long, and impossibly loud, vibrating the marrow in my bones. Now it's the voice, and though I can't understand all the words, I know the cadence. It's calling something to order. Some mornings I wake with my shirt damp from sweat, heart hammering like I've run a mile. When I go to the bathroom to splash my face, sometimes I catch it in the mirror, not clearly, not in the light, but enough. 6 faint lines running diagonally across my back, too straight to be scars from shrapnel or ice. They burn when I hear the note in my sleep, and every so often I think I can feel something beneath the skin pressing outward. I haven't told anyone. Who would believe me? I still have the coordinates memorized. Sometimes, late at night, I'll open a satellite map and zoom in on the endless white of Queen Maud Land. It looks as untouched as it ever did, smooth, cold, eternal. But I know what's under there. We buried it under 100 million tons of ice, but ice melts. It's been 6 months since they let me go. I keep my distance from the cold now, never more than a few miles from the sea, never where the ground stays frozen. I've convinced myself I can outrun the dreams if I stay warm. I was wrong. 2 nights ago, I woke to a voice on the shortwave scanner I keep for old habit's sake. Faint, buried under static, but clear enough to make me sit up. Not military, not rescue. A worker, breathing hard, trying to sound calm. "Base, this is Rig 4. We found a piece of black metal down here. Still warm." The signal cut out before the reply came through. I went digging through news feeds the next morning. Buried in the finance section, a small article: Polar Resource Group begins new drilling initiative in Queen Maud Land aimed at deep ice mineral prospecting. No mention of the anomaly. No mention of the coordinates, though I recognized them. That was yesterday. This morning I found a package outside my door. No return address, no postage, just a battered cardboard box damp from the rain. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a rusted iron band engraved with the same sigils I'd seen on the sarcophagus. All 7 had glowed once. Now every mark was dark. I keep the box shut, but I can still feel it in the room, as if the metal itself remembers my hands. When I close my eyes, I hear the horn note again, louder than ever, and the faint groan of ice shifting under something impossibly heavy. I don't need a map to know where it is, and beneath the ice, it still watches.